The boy screamed once, just once. Then a hand covered his mouth, and they started pulling him toward the car. Nobody moved. A Korean grandmother standing outside the tofu restaurant froze with both hands on her grocery cart. A man in a business suit outside the Korean BBQ spot turned his back and stared at his phone. The owner of the 24-hour Korean convenience store on the corner, a man who had been on that block for 22 years, who had seen everything, reached under his counter, found the handle of his phone, and did not pick it up. The whole street went quiet, except for one sound: footsteps, fast ones. She came out of nowhere, a black woman nobody knew, holding a stick she grabbed off the ground, and she walked straight toward three armed men like she had already decided how this was going to end. The first man turned around and smiled. He never smiled again. After that day, within 40 seconds, it was over. Two men were bleeding on the concrete, one was gone, and a little boy who didn't even know her name was holding her hand, shaking, alive. But here's the part that changed everything. Here's the part that turned this woman's entire life upside down. As she knelt down to look the boy in the eyes and asked him his name, he told her. And every single person still watching from behind the fogged windows of Koreatown went pale. Before we go any further, I need you to take a breath. Because what you just heard, that's not even the most shocking part of this story. What this woman did in the next 24 hours. What the Mafia boss said when he looked her in the eyes for the very first time. The moment he found out exactly who she was, where she came from, and what she did for a living. And the choice she was forced to make that nobody saw coming. That's what we're here for today. And I want to say something before we dive in. This community, the people who watch this channel, who come back every week, who share these stories with their families, whether you're in Seoul, in Lagos, in Los Angeles, or anywhere in between. You are the reason this channel exists. Not an algorithm, not a brand deal. You. If you're new here, welcome. You just found your new home. If you've been here, you already know. We tell the stories that sit at the intersection of cultures, of courage, of the places where different worlds collide and something extraordinary happens. That's this channel. That's always been this channel. So do me one favor before we go in. Hit that like button right now, because this story is going to move you. And when it does, drop one word in the comments that describes how you felt watching that little boy get grabbed. Just one word. I want to see what this community feels. Now, let's talk about who she really was. And why, of all the people on that street in the heart of Koreatown, Los Angeles, she was the only one who wasn't afraid to die. Her name was Diane Okafor. And if you had passed her on Vermont Avenue that morning, the morning everything changed, you would have seen a black woman in her early 40s carrying 2 bags of groceries, wearing a bright yellow head wrap, humming something quiet and low under her breath. You would not have looked twice. That was the thing about Diane. She didn't ask to be seen. She had spent 41 years on this earth learning how to move through it without causing a fuss, without drawing attention, without asking for too much from a world that, in her experience, didn't always give too much back. She had come to Los Angeles from Houston when she was 19, following a cousin, following a feeling, following the particular kind of hope that makes young people leave the places they know for the places they imagine. She had landed in Koreatown because it was what she could afford, and she had stayed because it became, slowly, without her ever formally deciding it, home. Koreatown had done that to a lot of people. That was its particular gift, and also its particular demand. It was a neighborhood that didn't ask you to be one thing. It had Korean families who had been there since the 80s, building businesses on blocks that nobody else wanted, Korean grandmothers who swept their own section of sidewalk every morning at 5:30 like an act of quiet territorial devotion. It had Black families who had been there since before that, rooted in a neighborhood that had shifted around them decade by decade and stayed anyway, which is a kind of loyalty the world never properly honors. It had Central American families, Filipino families, Armenian families, a Kurdish community 2 blocks east, a mosque and a Korean Presbyterian church, and a Black Baptist congregation, all within walking distance of each other, everyone layered on top of everyone in that compressed, complicated, beautiful way that only certain specific neighborhoods in certain specific American cities ever manage to achieve. It was loud and it was hard and it smelled like galbi smoke and fresh pan dulce and car exhaust and the specific sweetness of a Korean bakery at 6 in the morning, and there was always music coming from somewhere. K-pop from a phone, cumbia from a car, gospel from someone's open window on a Sunday. All of it mixing in the air above Vermont Avenue into something that belonged to no single culture, and somehow to all of them at once. Diane Okafor had loved this neighborhood from the first week she arrived. She had loved it the way you love things that are difficult and real, not despite what they ask of you, but partly because of it. She had grown up in Houston's Third Ward, same kind of compressed, complicated beauty, different ingredients. Her mother, Grace, had worked 2 jobs for as long as Diane could remember, cleaning office buildings before sunrise and waitressing in the evenings, moving through the world in a state of permanent exhaustion that she carried somehow with dignity and never once complained about. Her father had been gone by the time she was 5, a shape in a doorway, the smell of a cologne she still sometimes caught on the street and had to stop walking for a second. A laugh she could hear perfectly in her memory, but couldn't attach to a face anymore. She had stopped trying to attach it somewhere around her late 20s. Some doors, she had decided, were better left exactly where they were. She had become a home health aide, had been one for 14 years. Her client list in Koreatown was a portrait of the neighborhood itself, Mr. Benson, 93, Black. Originally from Mississippi, who still told jokes that made Diane cover her mouth when she laughed. Mrs. Park, 81, Korean, who fed Diane homemade japchae every Friday and pressed her hands between both of hers and said, "Gamsahamnida, Gamsahamnida, thank you," with a weight that needed no translation. Mr. Ruiz, 77, who had dementia and sometimes thought Diane was his daughter and called her by a different name, and Diane answered to that name without hesitation every single time, because what Mr. Ruiz needed in those moments was his daughter, and if she could be that for 20 minutes, she was going to be that for 20 minutes. That was who she was. She had a daughter named Amara, 17, sharp, already marking up college brochures with a highlighter like someone preparing for a military campaign. Amara had grown up in Koreatown the way children grow up in neighborhoods that hold multitudes, code-switching fluently, eating tteokbokki after school with her Korean friends and jollof rice at home, carrying both worlds inside her without contradiction, the way the best people always do. Diane had a small fire escape garden. Tomatoes, basil, dwarf peppers that refused to die through too hard winters. She had a laugh that filled rooms. She had a silence that her neighbors on the 4th floor of her building on Wilshire, Mrs. Kim next door, who had lived there for 15 years and brought Diane fish cake soup when she was sick, recognized as the silence of someone processing something deeply. She had never been in a fight in her life. Not once. Not in 41 years. And yet, on a Tuesday morning in October, carrying 2 bags of groceries from the Hankook supermarket on 6th Street and humming a song her mother used to sing when she was tired, something inside Diane Okafor woke up. But before we get to that moment, before we get to the second that changed everything, you need to know something. Diane had seen something the week before. something she hadn't told anyone about, something that, looking back, was a warning she didn't know how to read. 3 days before the kidnapping attempt, Diane had been walking home from Mrs. Park's apartment when she noticed a black car parked outside the building on the corner of Vermont and 5th. Just sitting there, engine off, no one getting in or out. In a neighborhood where parking was a blood sport, a car sitting idle in a legal spot for that long without explanation was unusual enough to register. She wouldn't have thought more of it, except it was the third time she'd seen that same car in that same spot in 5 days. She had stopped on the sidewalk, looked at it with that long, level look she had, the look that meant something was being processed, something was being filed away. A young Korean man was sweeping the sidewalk outside the convenience store. He had glanced at the car too, then at Diane, and something had passed between them. Wordless, the shared language of people who know their neighborhood well enough to notice when something doesn't belong. Then Diane had picked up her bag and gone home. She told herself it was nothing. She almost believed it. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the black car wasn't watching the building. It was watching the boy. A 7-year-old boy named Mateo, who every single morning without fail walked that same stretch of Vermont Avenue on his way to his school, alone. To understand what was about to happen, you need to understand the world that existed just beneath the surface of this particular stretch of Koreatown. Because on the outside, it looked like any block on Vermont Avenue on any given morning. Korean BBQ restaurants with their ventilation stacks already warming up. A Pojang matcha-style Pojang tent on the corner where an older man sold hotteok, sweet Korean pancakes, from 6 in the morning. A nail salon with the lights just flickering on. A church with a sign in Korean and English and Spanish. A black-owned hair salon 3 doors down. The smell of doenjang jjigae simmering somewhere above a restaurant that wouldn't open for 4 more hours. This was Koreatown, Los Angeles, one of the densest neighborhoods in America, where cultures didn't just coexist, they compressed into something new, something that belonged entirely to itself. And running underneath all of it, in the spaces between the ordinary and the visible, was a network that most people who lived there had learned, carefully, over years, to move around rather than through. At the center of that network was a man named Vincent Caruso. Vincent was 53, Italian-American, 3rd generation, born in the Silver Lake neighborhood 3 miles east of where he now operated. His grandfather had come to Los Angeles in the 1950s and built something modest. His father had expanded it. Vincent had inherited it at 30 and spent 20 years making it both more profitable and less visible, which, in his world, was the definition of success. He was not a large man, quiet, still, controlled in that specific way that comes from spending decades managing yourself because the alternative was too costly. He wore simple clothes, drove a modest car, a gray sedan that blended into the Koreatown traffic like it had been designed to. He ate at the same Korean-owned restaurant on 8th Street every Thursday evening. Galbatang, always, the same order for 11 years. And the owner, Mr. Cho, who knew exactly who he was, brought it without being asked, and accepted the envelope left on the table without discussion. That was how it worked on this block. Not with violence. Not usually. Not anymore. With arrangement. With the kind of mutual understanding that develops between people who have occupied the same space long enough to know each other's boundaries. The Korean business community on that stretch of Vermont had its own relationship with Vincent. Complicated, transactional, never fully comfortable, but stable. He kept certain problems away. They kept certain questions unasked. It was not friendship. It was geography. Vincent had a wife, Elena, who ran a small flower importing business and existed in her marriage with the dignity of a woman who had made a deliberate decision years ago about how much she was going to know. He had a son, Mateo, 7 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with dinosaurs, in the way that 7-year-olds are obsessed with things, completely and without embarrassment. Mateo went to a small private school 4 blocks from their apartment. He walked every morning at 7:45. Vincent had offered protection, drivers, a detail, the whole arrangement. Mateo had refused in the way that 7-year-olds refuse things, absolutely, without negotiation, on the grounds that it made him feel weird. He wanted to walk like the other kids walked, past the hot dog cart, past the hair salon, past the corner where the old man always said good morning in 3 languages. Vincent had looked at his son for a long time, and then he had said yes. He had said yes because he remembered being 7. He had said yes because his own father had wrapped him in so much protection that ordinary childhood had been impossible, and he had spent his adult life grieving it quietly. He had said yes because Mateo's mornings, those 4 blocks of ordinary, unremarkable, beautiful childhood freedom, were the one thing he was trying to save from the life he had chosen. That decision would almost cost him everything. Because what Vincent didn't know, what his entire network had somehow catastrophically missed, was that his rivals had been watching Mateo for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of surveillance. 6 weeks of documenting the route, timing every step, identifying the gap in the middle of the block where Mateo was most exposed, where the sightlines from the Korean restaurant on one side and the laundromat on the other created a blind spot just large enough for a van to pull up and be gone before anyone fully processed what had happened. They had chosen the moment with surgical precision. And on that Tuesday morning in October, they moved. The man behind it was named Dario Stein, 38 years old. Hungry in the specific way of men who believe the world has undervalued them and have decided to collect the difference by force. He had been pressing against Vincent's operation for 2 years, not frontally, but from the edges, the way water finds cracks, chipping away at arrangements, redirecting revenue streams, making Vincent's world slightly smaller every quarter in ways that were hard to respond to directly. But taking the boy? This was different from all of that. This wasn't business. This was the message that only gets sent when someone has decided that patience is over. The message: nothing you love is untouchable. Not even here. Not even in the middle of a busy Koreatown morning with 100 people 20 feet away. 3 men were sent. Professional. They had a van, a route, and a 45-second window between the hot take cart and the school entrance where Mateo walked alone. They had planned for everything. Absolutely everything. Except for a black woman in a yellow head wrap coming around the corner from Hankook supermarket at exactly the wrong moment. Carrying 2 bags of groceries, humming, and seeing, in her peripheral vision without even registering it consciously yet, a broken broomstick leaning against the wall of Mr. Cho's convenience store. The 3 men had run their calculations on this block a dozen times. They knew how Koreatown crowds behaved. They knew how bystanders froze. They knew that the particular combination of fear and neighborhood politics that existed on this street would keep every single person exactly where they were for the 30 seconds they needed. They had accounted for every variable, except one. The variable that never shows up in any calculation. The variable called, what happens when someone simply refuses to be afraid? It happened fast. That is the thing about violence. The real kind. The kind that arrives without warning into the middle of an ordinary Tuesday morning. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't give you time to prepare or decide what kind of person you are when it comes. It just happens. And in a single breath, you find out. Diane had just turned onto Vermont Avenue from 5th Street at 7:52 in the morning. The air was that specific Los Angeles October cool. Not cold exactly, but carrying the memory of summer finally letting go. She had 2 bags from Hankook, one with produce, one heavier with the glass jar of doenjang paste Mrs. Park had asked her to pick up. She was thinking about Amara, who had a college interview at USC that afternoon and had been pretending not to be nervous since breakfast. She was thinking about whether the tteokbokki place on the corner was open yet. She was humming something her mother used to sing. She heard the boy before she saw him. One sharp cry, high and sudden, cut off almost immediately. And then silence. The particular silence of something being suppressed. She turned. 20 feet ahead, 2 men had a small boy by his arms, lifting him off the ground. A third stood at the open door of a dark van parked against the curb, engine running, scanning the street with the practiced calm of someone expecting no complications. The boy was kicking. His dinosaur backpack swung from one shoulder. His mouth was covered by a large hand. His eyes, above that hand, white and wide and searching, swept across the sidewalk until they found Diane. His eyes found her eyes. And in the fraction of time between one heartbeat and the next, something passed between them. Diane would try to describe it for years. To Amara, to the police officer who took her statement, to Vincent Caruso himself later, over food she couldn't taste in a restaurant she barely saw. She never found the right words. The closest she ever got was this. It wasn't bravery. It wasn't a decision. It was recognition. Something inside. Her recognized something inside him and moved before her mind had finished processing what her eyes were seeing. She was a mother. That little boy needed a mother right now. And Diane Okafor had never once in her life been able to walk past something that needed her. She dropped the groceries. Both bags hit the pavement. The doenjang jar hit a crack in the sidewalk and split. She did not look at it. The broomstick was against Mr. Cho's wall. The same spot it had been sitting in for so long it had become invisible. She grabbed it without breaking stride, the way you grab something you've reached for 1,000 times. The man at the van door saw her first. He laughed. Short. Involuntary. The laugh of someone whose brain has filed what they're seeing under comedy rather than threat, because the alternative doesn't compute. "Lady," he said, "walk away." She was already 8 feet from him. She did not walk away. What happened next lasted 43 seconds. 43 seconds that would be watched millions of times on a screen, studied, argued about, wept over, because Mr. Cho's security camera, the one he'd had installed after a robbery 3 years earlier and had never once thought would capture something like this, recorded every moment of it in steady, unflinching detail. She hit the first man across the back of the knees, low, sweeping, committed completely. He buckled, his legs simply failed, and he went down hard on the Koreatown sidewalk with a sound that made Mr. Cho, watching through the scratched glass of his shop window, put both hands over his mouth. The second man dropped Mateo's arm. That was the mistake, because the moment Mateo's arm was free, Diane was already past the first man, and when the second man reached into his jacket, she brought the stick down across his forearm with everything she had. The sound it made is the sound that people who watched the footage later said made them stop breathing. The third man came at her then. Properly, with full commitment, because the window was closing and the job was already gone and he needed this to end. She stepped into him, not back, forward. She caught him across the shoulder, then the side of his head as he stumbled, and pulled Mateo behind her body with her free hand. She planted her feet on the sidewalk of Vermont Avenue in the heart of Koreatown, Los Angeles. And she did not move. Her chest was heaving, the stick was in her hand, and she was looking at the 3 men with an expression that Mr. Cho would describe to every person who asked him about it for the rest of his life. He said, "She didn't look angry. She didn't look scared. She looked like a woman who had made a decision and was finished making it." The first man looked at her from the ground. He made the calculation. He got in the van. The second followed, cradling his arm. The third, the one whose ears were still ringing, looked at Diane for one long second. Then he got in the van too. The door slid shut. The van pulled into Vermont Avenue traffic and was gone. And Matteo Caruso, 7 years old, dinosaur backpack still on one shoulder, turned around and buried his face in Diane Okafor's stomach and cried with the entire weight of his small, terrified, alive body. Diane held him, one arm around his shoulders, the stick still in her other hand. She looked down the avenue where the van had gone. Her hands were shaking, not from fear alone, from something larger than fear. Something that felt like her whole body catching up to what her soul had already done 15 seconds before her mind got involved. Vermont Avenue was silent. She looked around. The hot dog cart man was staring from behind his cart. The grandmother with the grocery trolley had not moved. 3 people in the Korean BBQ restaurant doorway stood perfectly still. Not one of them had come out. Not one person on this entire block had moved. Diane stood in the middle of the sidewalk with a little boy, pressed against her and a stick in her hand and broken glass and spilled doenjang paste on the pavement, and she felt, underneath the adrenaline, something she hadn't expected. She felt completely alone. And then the door of Mr. Cho's convenience store opened, and Mr. Cho, 67 years old, on this block for 22 years, who had watched everything through his scratched window, stepped out onto the sidewalk. He looked at Diane. He looked at the boy. And then he said, very quietly, in his careful English, "Come inside. I call police. You safe here." And he held the door open. In 22 years on that block, Mr. Cho had never once involved himself in anything that happened outside his store. What he saw that morning changed something in him that he would never fully be able to explain. Inside the store, behind the counter, with Matteo wrapped in a blanket, Mr. Cho pulled from his back room and a cup of instant sikye, sweet rice drink, pressed into the boy's hands. Diane knelt down and looked at him. "What's your name?" she asked. He wiped his nose on his sleeve, straightened slightly, the way children straighten when they've decided to be brave. "Matteo," he said. "Matteo Caruso." Diane went very still. Behind the counter, Mr. Cho, who had been reaching for his phone, also went still. He and Diane looked at each other over the boy's head. And in that shared look, between a black woman from Houston who had made Koreatown her home and a Korean man who had built his life on this corner, was the same understanding, the same 2 words. Oh no. Within 16 minutes of the incident, Vincent Caruso knew. That was the machinery of his world, faster than sirens, faster than any official account, faster than the version of events that ever makes it into a police report. By the time a cruiser turned onto Vermont Avenue, Vincent was already in a car 2 blocks away, watching footage from Mr. Cho's security camera on a phone, held by his lieutenant. He watched it once. He watched it twice. The 3rd time, his lieutenant said his name in the careful way that people say the names of men they are monitoring for a particular kind of breaking point. Vincent held up one finger. He watched it a 4th time. He watched a black woman in a yellow head wrap drop her groceries on a Koreatown sidewalk, pick up a broomstick from outside a Korean convenience store, and walk toward 3 of his rivals' men like she had already made peace with whatever happened next. He watched her protect his son. He watched her stand between Matteo and the van like a wall. He watched Mr. Cho open his door. Vincent Caruso, a man who had spent 30 years constructing an identity around being unreadable, felt his throat close in the back seat of a car on a Tuesday morning in Koreatown. He sat with that for a moment. Then, find her. Everything. Who she is, where she lives, her daughter, her work, everything. And listen carefully. A pause. She is not to be frightened. Not by anyone. Make sure every single person in our network understands that. This woman is to be treated with complete respect. Another pause. She saved my son's life on a public sidewalk with a broomstick. His voice was very quiet. Make sure everyone understands what that means. On the other side of Koreatown, Diane was sitting in a plastic chair inside Mr. Cho's store, waiting for police, watching Mateo drink sake with both hands around the cup like something precious. Amara had come. Diane had called her first, before the police, because that was the order of things, and had walked in the door, taken one look at the scene, and sat down next to her mother without a word. Mr. Cho had made tea. He moved around his store quietly, not intruding but not leaving, present in the way of people who have decided, in a moment, to take a side. At some point, Amara said, "You hit them with a stick, Mama." "I did," Diane said. "A broomstick." It was what was available. Amara looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Do you know whose son that is?" "I do now," Diane said. "And?" "And I'd do it again," Diane said simply. "He's 7 years old, Amara." Amara looked at her mother for a long moment. The way she had been looking at her since she was small. That sharp, clear look that Diane had always felt saw her more accurately than she sometimes wanted to be seen. Then Amara reached across and squeezed her hand once, hard. And that was that. The police came and went. Professional, careful, and she noticed, without anything ever being said directly, that the name Caruso produced a particular stillness in the room when it came up. A recalibration. After they left, Mr. Cho locked his front door, something he hadn't done in the middle of the day in 22 years, and made more tea. They sat together in the quiet of the store. Diane, Amara, Mateo, now asleep across 2 plastic chairs, Mr. Cho, behind his counter, in the particular shared silence of people who have been through something together. Then there was a knock at the locked door. Mr. Cho looked through the glass. He looked at Diane. His expression said everything. A young man stood outside, clean, still, holding a white envelope in both hands. Behind him, at a respectful distance, 2 others. "Ms. Okafor," he said through the glass. "Mr. Caruso would like to meet with you, at your convenience. He asked me to give you this." Diane looked at the envelope. Mr. Cho came out from behind his counter and stood beside her. Not blocking, not deciding for her, just standing there, beside her. Which was its own kind of statement. Every reasonable part of Diane's mind said, "Don't open the door. Don't take the envelope. Don't let this world pull you any further in than it already has." Then Mateo stirred on his plastic chairs, half awake, and said in a sleepy voice, "Is that one of my dad's guys? My dad's nice. He'll want to say thank you." Diane looked at Mr. Cho. Mr. Cho looked at her. "I watch Amara," he said quietly. "She stays here. You go 1 hour." He held her gaze. "You come back." It wasn't a question. Diane took the envelope. She walked out into the Koreatown afternoon and got into a car going somewhere she had never been, to meet a man she had only ever known as a name that made the air in rooms change. She did not know that the conversation waiting for her would last not 1 hour, but 4. They took her to a restaurant on 8th Street, Korean-owned, the kind that has been in the same building for 30 years and looks exactly like what it is, a place where real food is made by people who care about it, where the banchan comes in small ceramic dishes that have been filled and refilled 10,000 times, where the smell of doenjang jjigae and grilled meat and sesame oil wraps around you at the door like something you didn't know you needed. Mr. Cho's restaurant. Vincent's. Thursday restaurant. The place that existed at the exact intersection of both their worlds. Diane would understand that choice later. Vincent was already there. Sitting at a corner table back to the wall, hands flat on the tablecloth. He stood when she walked in. That surprised her. He was smaller than she'd expected, leaner. His face was lined in the way of a man who has carried weight for a long time, not harsh lines, but deep ones. His eyes were dark and very still, the kind of stillness that is not peace but practice. He looked at her in the way people look when they are reconciling an image with a reality. Then he said, "Thank you." 2 words. But the catch in his voice on the first syllable, barely there, gone almost before it arrived, told her exactly what those 2 words had cost a man like him to say out loud. They sat. He poured her water himself, and she understood, without being told, that this was deliberate, that nothing about this man in this moment was accidental. "My son told me you sang to him," Vincent said, "while you waited for the police." Diane looked at the table. She had sung, something low, almost under her breath, her mother's song. She hadn't fully realized she was doing it until Mateo had stopped shaking. "He said it was the song that told him he was safe," Vincent said. The restaurant was very quiet around them. "I want to do something for you," Vincent said. "For you and your daughter. Name it." "I don't want anything," Diane said. "I want my daughter's future to stay intact. I want my life back the way it was this morning. That's all I want." "You understand," he said carefully, "that Dario Stein's men know your face. He knows who you are. You are already inside the situation whether you chose it or not." The words landed with weight, because she knew. She had known it from the second Mateo said his name inside Mr. Cho's store. The door she had walked through on Vermont Avenue did not open from the other side. "Then tell me what that means," she said. "Exactly." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, and Vincent Caruso, who had spent 30 years being the person in every room who had the answer, said, "I don't know yet." Just that. Quietly, without apology. And something about the honesty of those 3 words frightened Diane more profoundly than anything else that had happened that day. The 4 hours moved the way certain conversations move, slowly and all at once. Food arrived without being ordered. They ate without fully noticing. Vincent talked carefully, in measured portions, reading her before he gave her more. He told her about Dario, about 2 years of erosion, about the fact that what happened on Vermont Avenue was not random. It was the first move of something Dario had been building toward for months. "He made 2 mistakes today," Vincent said. "What were they?" Diane asked. "The first was underestimating what I would do to protect my son." "And the second?" Vincent looked at her steadily. "He hurt a child in the middle of Koreatown, in front of Mr. Cho's store, in front of a community that has been on that block for generations and has its own rules about what is and isn't acceptable." A pause. "That footage is already moving, and when it finishes moving, Dario will have lost something in this neighborhood that he cannot buy back." Diane asked questions. She pushed back when things didn't track. At some point in the 3rd hour, Vincent paused mid-sentence and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him yet. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "I'm afraid of the situation," she said. "That's not the same thing. Most people I meet can't make that distinction. Most people you meet haven't spent 14 years sitting with people while they're dying," she said. "You learn to tell the difference between what's actually dangerous and what just takes up a lot of space." Vincent looked at her for a long time after that. Then he said something she wasn't ready for. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice had shifted, not softer but more direct. The voice of someone placing something real on the table. "Dario has your daughter's class schedule," he said. "Her college applications, your address on Wilshire, your clients, including Mrs. Park, Mr. Benson, Mr. Ruiz." He said it the way you say things that need to be said cleanly, because softening them doesn't change them. It only delays the moment when the person in front of you can start responding. Diane's face did not change, but her hands, flat on the tablecloth, pressed down very slightly. "Mrs. Park is 81 years old," she said. "I know," he said. A silence. "Tell me my options," she said. "Real life is not the movies. Real life is a black woman from Houston sitting across from an Italian-American man in a Korean restaurant in Los Angeles, being told that the most righteous thing she has ever done has put everyone she loves at risk. Real life is keeping your face still and your voice level while the floor drops away beneath you." Diane kept her face still. She kept her voice level. "Two options," Vincent said. "First, I move you and Amara tonight. Somewhere safe, completely outside Dario's knowledge. New neighborhood, new routines. Within a few months, this becomes something that happened in a different chapter of your life. You take us away from everything," Diane said. "Mrs. Park, Mr. Benson, Mr. Ruiz, Mr. Cho, everything we've built here. I keep you alive," he said. "And the second option." He looked at his hands on the table. "You stay. In your apartment on Wilshire. Your clients. Your neighborhood. Your daughter's school. I place protection around all of it, discreet. Nothing that changes the texture of your life, while I handle Dario Stein in the way that this kind of problem gets handled." "How long?" she asked. "Weeks." She was quiet. She thought about Mrs. Park pressing her hands and saying Gamsa Hamnida every Friday like it was a small ceremony. The specific weight of gratitude between two people who understand each other without sharing a language. She thought about what it would mean to Mrs. Park to come home one day and find that Diane was simply gone. She thought about Mr. Benson's jokes, about how he always said, "You ready for this one?" before each one, like a warning. About who would sit with him on the long evenings. She thought about Mr. Ruiz calling her by his daughter's name, about the relief on his face when he believed his daughter had arrived, about how she had never once corrected him, about what it would do to him if she disappeared from his life without explanation. She thought about Mr. Cho, about 22 years on that corner and one morning when he had finally opened his door. About the cup of sikye he pressed into a frightened boy's hands because it was the thing he had that might help. She thought about Amara's highlighted college brochures, about the 3-star school, about the future built one double shift at a time. She thought about the stubborn pepper plant on the fire escape that refused, season after season, to give up and die. She thought about a 7-year-old boy's eyes finding hers across 20 feet of Vermont Avenue. And she thought, if I run now, what were all those years of showing up for? What does it mean to be the person who picks up the stick if the moment it costs you something, you pack a bag and disappear? "If I stay," she said, "I need you to understand something clearly." Vincent waited. "I am not part of your world. My daughter is not part of your world. My clients, Mrs. Park, Mr. Benson, Mr. Ruiz, are not part of your world and they never will be. You protect us because you owe a human debt. Not a business debt. Not a favor. A debt. The kind that gets paid and then finished." She held his gaze. "And when it's paid, we go back to being strangers who shared one." Extraordinary Tuesday. The restaurant was very quiet. Vincent looked at her for a long time, then he nodded. "Those are my terms too," he said. Diane studied his face. She wasn't completely certain she believed him, but she believed that in this moment, in this Korean restaurant on 8th Street, he meant it more than he had meant many things, and sometimes the meaning in a moment is enough to build the next thing on. What happened to Dario Stein in the weeks that followed is a story for another day. But here is what happened to Diane Okafor. 6 weeks after that Tuesday morning on Vermont Avenue, Amara opened her laptop at the kitchen table on Wilshire Boulevard and went completely silent. Full scholarship. The school with the 3 stars in the brochure. The long shot. The one. They ended up on the kitchen floor together, laughing and crying in the way that joy arrives when it's been a long time getting to you. Sudden and overwhelming and completely real. Mrs. Park heard them, through the wall and knocked. When Diane opened the door, Mrs. Park looked at their faces and immediately understood, and she clapped her hands together and said, "Aigu, aigu," a Korean expression of overwhelming emotion that needs no translation, and pushed past them into the kitchen to make celebration food. The pepper plant on the fire escape finally produced fruit that November. Small, red, unreasonably alive. Mr. Cho never unlocked his door during the day again without first looking through the glass. And every Tuesday morning for months, on Vermont Avenue, on the same sidewalk where all of it happened, a 7-year-old boy in a dinosaur backpack would stop outside Diane's building on his way to school. A quiet man walked 12 feet behind him, far enough to preserve the feeling of freedom. Mateo would look up at her window on the 4th floor. Diane would look down. He would wave. She would wave back. That was all. That was everything. I want to take a moment before we close, because this story that started with a boy screaming once on an ordinary Tuesday morning on Vermont Avenue in Koreatown, Los Angeles, is really about one thing. It's about what happens when an ordinary person refuses to look away. Everyone on that block made a choice. The grandmother with her grocery cart, the man outside the BBQ restaurant, the people behind the fogged windows of the tofu shop. I'm not here to judge any of them. Fear is real. The stakes were real. Most of us will never be tested the way Diane was tested that morning, but Diane made a different choice. And what I want you to notice, what I think is the most important thing about this entire story, is that her choice on that sidewalk did not happen in a vacuum. It happened because of who she had been, quietly and without applause, for 41 years. It happened because of Mrs. Park's hands pressed around hers every Friday, because of Mr. Benson's jokes and the way she laughed, at every single one of them, because of Mr. Ruiz's daughter's name and the fact that Diane had been answering to it for years without ever needing credit for it. Because of Amara growing up in a Koreatown apartment, learning how to move through more than one world at once and seeing her mother do the same. It happened because of Mr. Cho, who had been on that corner for 22 years and who watched a woman he had never spoken to drop her groceries and pick up a stick, and who made a decision, in that exact moment, about what kind of person he wanted to have been when this was all over. This story is a Koreatown story. It is a Black woman's story. It is a story about a neighborhood where cultures compress into something that belongs to all of them and none of them, where a Black woman and a Korean store owner can look at each other over a frightened child and share the same understanding without a single word. That is not nothing. That is everything. The courage on Vermont Avenue didn't come from nowhere. It came from 41 years of deciding, every morning, quietly, without an audience, that the people in front of you matter, that the child in front of you matters, that the neighborhood you live in, your Koreatown, your block, wherever it is that you have chosen to plant yourself, is worth showing up for, fully, every single day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. That's the thing nobody tells you about courage. It doesn't arrive in the moment you need it. It arrives because of every moment before that one, every act of kindness you gave when nobody was watching, every time you stayed when you could have left, every time you chose to be present in the life in front of you instead of waiting for a better one. Diane Okafor didn't find her courage on Vermont Avenue. She found out she'd had it all along. That is the story. And I am so grateful to every single person watching this, in Los Angeles, in Seoul, in Lagos, in London, in Houston, anywhere this story reaches. I am so grateful you were here for it. Before you go, 60 seconds. Just 60. This channel exists at the intersection of cultures, of stories, of the places where different worlds meet, and something extraordinary happens. That's not an accident. That is a deliberate weekly choice to find the stories that live in the space between communities, between cultures, between the world as it is, and the world as people like Diane Okafor refuse to stop believing it can be. Whether you came here from the Black community, from the Korean community, from the African diaspora, from the Korean diaspora, from Koreatown, Los Angeles, from Seoul, from Lagos, from Houston, from anywhere that two worlds have ever pressed up against each other and produced something neither one could have made alone, you are exactly who this channel is for. All of you, at the same time. That is not a niche. That is a vision. And I am building it with you, one story at a time. If this story moved you, if you watched Diane Okafor walk toward that van and felt something rise up in your chest that you recognized, here is how you keep more of this coming. Subscribe. It tells YouTube that this kind of storytelling deserves to exist, deserves to be pushed to more people, deserves more than an afterthought in someone's recommended feed. Every subscriber is a vote for the stories that live at the intersection. Join the membership. Extended stories, early access before videos go public. The join button is right below this video. Less than a coffee. Directly funds the work. And share this. Right now. If one person in your life needs to hear Diane Okafor's story today, your mother, your daughter, your neighbor, your friend, the person you've been meaning to send something meaningful to for weeks, send them this. That costs you nothing, and it means everything to what we are building here together. I'll be back next week with another story from the intersection. Until then, take care of each other and pick up the stick.